Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Have Words. I'm your host, Lara Samuels. Let's Have Words. This is our second episode of this show. I'm really excited. We're coming to you live every week from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Sundays, 8 to 9 uh, Eastern Time. And we're broadcasting on WWHR internet media. So this is a brand new show. We just got started. Like I said, this is just the second episode. Just to remind some of you who may be listening that may be familiar with Let's Have Words. Let's Have Words, a little bit of history here. Let's Have Words was actually originally a Wednesday night poetry and storytelling open mic that occurred at the Hearing Room, which was an art center in Lowell, and it was that for a long, long time. But somehow it evolved, it transformed into a talk show. So for those of you that are familiar with the Let's Have Words title, we are no longer poetry open mic. We are now transformed into a talk show. So as a talk show, the basic format of the show is going to be every week we're going to be combing the internet, combing the newspapers, looking for interesting topics, ranging from the mundane to the profound. We're going to be looking for arts and culture topics, but also science, technology, politics. We're not going to shy away from controversial issues, you name it. We are going to be exploring all different aspects of anything we can have a conversation about, anything, anybody that's doing anything interesting in our area. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for. So never know what you're going to get listening to Let's Have Words. So the basic format of the show is that I'm going to introduce a topic, and then we are going to bring on a guest that we will talk to for a little while, have a conversation with for a little while, and then we are going to open the phones, open the chat, so people can call in or chat in. I guess, I don't know, I just made up that phrase, if they have questions and comments. So that's kind of the idea. It's a participatory show. We hope that you will, call in and participate with your questions and comments. So that's kind of the basic format. So last week, we talked about bluegrass music, which, and we talked to Joe Laporto, who's somebody who is a big advocate for bluegrass music in the area. And this week, we're completely switching gears, and we're going to be talking about green burials. So that's our topic for today. Completely different, obviously, than what we talked about last week. So green burials, obviously, the green burials refers to using ecologically sound, ecologically friendly methods of burial. And it's becoming more common, more popular. People are more curious about how they can extend their environmental stewardship that they may be practicing in their everyday lives into their death. So this is something that I think more and more people are becoming curious about. So we are going to be talking to Lee Webster, who is a funeral reform advocate. And she is somebody who has a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise in this area. And we're going to be talking with her about a whole range of issues surrounding green burials, including what is a green burial, what is involved, how can I get a green burial? This is something I want to know, right? How exactly, if I want to make this part of my end of life, like on my list of choices for end of life, how do I make that happen? Also, what goes into a green burial, what's some of the technology. And I'm really interested in a whole host of things surrounding this. For me, I always like to, I've been thinking about this all week, actually, to be honest. So, and I've been thinking about how like the whole notion of burial, for example, and how, a lot of the things that we do as humans, surrounding the burial, this has been something that has been going on, for thousands of years. The Neanderthals famously buried their dead, right? We've been burying people for a long time, partially for practical reasons, but there are a lot of rituals and a lot of we've utilized a lot of different ways of a lot of technology that we've used to preserve the body after death, like embalming and putting people in crypts, and of course mummification. And even now, when we think of burying somebody, we go and we pick out a coffin. Sometimes coffins are often very fancy, but they can range from just a box to an air-conditioned, sort of climate-controlled kind of a thing. But it seems like we put a lot of effort into preserving the body after death, which, for me, when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, if a green burial is actually the polar opposite of what we may be thinking about when we're thinking about preserving the body. It's actually accelerating perhaps the decomposition process. So it's actually instead of preserving the body, we're actually making it decompose faster in many cases. So I was thinking about how this may be, make some people uncomfortable. This whole notion of instead of preservation, which is something that we're very used to culturally, that we're actually, with the green burial, we're actually doing the opposite. So I think I personally have no problem with that, but I was thinking this may be sort of a psychological barrier that many people may experience when thinking about this. So I was very interested in that aspect of it. And I was also looking up, so behind me right here is a cemetery. So this cemetery is actually in Gainesville, Florida. And if you look at it, you'll notice that it has none of the features of a traditional cemetery. So you don't see any gravestones, you don't see any fences, you don't see paved roads. You don't see, any of the things that we associate, with a traditional, a conventional cemetery. So these things are cropping up around the country, these conservation cemeteries, and these are places where you can have a green burial. My understanding is that you can, there's different, obviously, with just like with anything, there's different degrees of this, but that a conservation cemetery is an entire cemetery that's devoted to this concept. So, the grounds themselves are kept sort of, it looks like a park, right? They're kept kind of wild, and the gravestones themselves are often, instead of being like a fancy granite marker, it's just a rock, basically. So nothing that you would normally associate with a conventional cemetery. So I'm not sure how many of these exist. I'm actually going to ask our guest about that, how many of these are actually available, if there are any in the area, or, but they are cropping up. They're becoming more and more common. The concept of a green burial, as we become more environmentally conscientious, one hopes, that's becoming a little more, that's something that people are asking more questions about. So I expect that that the green burial will be in demand more and more as we move forward, and more of these will crop up in response to that. So I'm interested in, not only I talked a little about the psychological barrier, a whole notion of accelerating the decomposition process, but also, I'm interested in other barriers, like legal barriers, and maybe some people, there are a lot of cultural and religious implications here. Are people concerned that a green burial will somehow violate, their cultural or religious practices? So I'm going to be asking a little bit about that. And also, are there, the laws that may be in place too that may restrict some of this? So there's so many different issues surrounding this. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, wow, this is just, opens up a whole can of worms. Also, the not just that, not just the laws and the cultural restrictions, but also the industry itself. I think about, the average funeral costs like, I don't know how much, $10,000 or more, depending. And, a lot of that is the actual, is the actual coffin itself, the receptacle that we bury people in. And, a green burial, it would seem to me, would involve a much simpler receptacle, a much simpler container that perhaps wouldn't be quite so pricey. And, is that a threat, to the industry? So that's another question that I will definitely have for our guests. So all of those things are circulating around in my brain as we talk about as we venture into this world of green burials. So I do want to introduce our guest. Before I do that, about halfway through our interview, I am going to be inviting people to ask questions, and you can ask questions through the chat. That's one way you can do it. So feel free to post your questions in the chat. Another way you can ask questions is simply by calling in, and we will hear, the old-fashioned way, we'll hear your voice. It's not an old-fashioned telephone, but I really wish there was, actually. I like that idea of having an actual telephone, but you can call in, we'll hear your voice, and you can ask your questions that way, whatever makes you comfortable. So about halfway through the interview, I will open the phones for you guys to call in with your questions. But I do want to introduce my guest, and my guest today is Lee Webster. She is a funeral reform advocate. So check that out. There she is. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Lara. Thanks
Welcome.
for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so pleased to have you. This is a fascinating topic.
It is.
So Lee has, I don't want to, I want to just give people a sense of how much expertise you have in this area. So you are the former president and education vice chair of Green Burial Council International. So this is an international movement.
Absolutely.
All over the world. Yeah. And executive director, closer to home, New Hampshire Funeral Resources Education and Advocacy, board director for the Conservation Burial Alliance, former president of the National Home Funeral Alliance, and co-founder, former member of National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, the Doula Council, and co-founder and former board member for the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, organizer, writer, and webmaster for funeral.org partnership website. So a whole list of credentials.
And there's your show.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing this for a long time, it sounds like.
Yeah, I have.
So, let's start there. So you've been doing this for a long time. So I think many people would be curious about how you got involved in this. What made you interested in this to begin with?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I've come down to sort of a pat answer, and that is that I'm a recovering English major, and anyone who's spent any time reading a book or watching a movie or anything else will know that someone has to die. So that's pretty much what's informed me. But I because of the nature of the work. Here, of what we're talking about, all the points that you brought up so beautifully. Really, what this is about for me is it became a confluence between my conservation work and my hospice work. And when I discovered green burial on a day I was driving to teach cross country skiing nearby here, and I heard Mark Harris speaking on the radio about his book Grave Matters, and it just pulled everything together for me. I pretty much stopped doing what I was doing. I stopped working. I do work in development, and I became involved with all of these organizations and with the movement, and trying to make a difference here.
Wow. Yeah. So when did that happen? When did this revelation?
It was about 15 years ago.
About 15 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a long time. So your hospice work, I saw the doula. So you're also involved in, I guess being a doula is different than being a midwife, but you're involved in that.
Yes, and then the terms
the beginning of life as well as the end.
Right. Well, a lot of it has to do with trying to find the right terminology for all of the work that we're doing, because this is really brand new. People, don't know what to do with a lot of these terms. So, one thing I could mention is that the work that I do goes pretty much from diagnosis to disposition and beyond. My first work in this was in bereavement. But what we're trying to do in all these organizations and is to and in people's thinking is to start seeing this as a seamless continuum from and really before you get a diagnosis is a good time to be thinking about these things. But the idea here is to go from that, and we're looking to different helpers now. The funeral industry is still strong. It does good work. It's very important and most people who are doing some of these other alternate things are still using the funeral industry, people in the industry who are having to adapt because people are asking, they're demanding different things. And what they're demanding is that they have more time at home with their loved ones. They're demanding that they have, they figure out a way to be able to afford these funerals. Also that they're looking for, as you mentioned, a more environmental ending, more environmental exit.
Yeah.
And another big piece of this is the social justice and environmental justice aspect of what we do with our bodies after we die and how we die. All of those things have to do with a lot of questions that not everyone has is equipped to ask because of their particular circumstance. So what we're trying to do is open all of this up so that everyone has access. Wow. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that does that right. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot. I mean, I used to be a hospice nurse, so I'm a little bit familiar with the this world, and yeah, it needs a lot of reform, it seems to me, and a lot, like you said, people are demanding a better end of life, like this hope that death is a part of life, and this is and people are starting to want more options for themselves and their loved ones. So, I mean, I think that's really important that you're advocating for some of these things during this time. Yeah. So, what is a green burial? Like, what does it entail? What are some of the things that would go into having a green? Well, first of all, what makes a traditional or conventional burial not green?
Well, what's the difference between a traditional burial, which is a green burial, and a conventional burial, which is a vault burial?
Right? Okay, all right, get our lingo down there.
That's the first thing to understand.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that unless they buried someone that they know. They don't know that when they go to the cemetery, they're required to purchase a concrete box to put the casket in, the steel from China or Canada and the rainforest woods, from South America. That's what our caskets are all made of. So we've got first we're doing that. We're creating an enormous carbon footprint for the casket itself, and then we're putting it in a concrete box that costs a lot of money and really serves no purpose other than to keep the ground flat for mowing the lawn.
Yeah. Is that really that's really the purpose?
It is now. It didn't start out to be. I can tell you a quick story about that.
Sure, yeah, please
the
do.
way that we got vaults, I mean, there were vaults earlier because people, they were trying to figure out how to put as many bodies into cemeteries as they could because it was more efficient and cost effective. And when municipalities started taking over, it meant that they needed to do this in a really efficient way, which makes perfect sense.
Right.
But what happened was this gentleman whose family owned an asphalt and concrete company took a trip to Egypt in 1930 and to the tomb of Tutankhamun. And he had this great idea that he would come back, and he now had a much better idea for the vault. He brought back the idea of a concrete vault that was, by the way, lined with asphalt. The purpose, though, we have to remember this, the purpose was to keep the ghouls from coming out. And it was to protect us from Grandma becoming a ghoul and coming back to haunt us. And it was to protect Grandma from what they perceived to be threats, which would be vermin of some kind that could go, 5 feet into the ground, which wasn't a realistic thought either. So the purpose, we've outlived the purpose of the vault.
Yeah. So before 1930, we weren't doing this.
No.
We were
No.
just the green burial was.
For the
the
most part,
norm before the
yeah.
1930s. Interesting.
Exactly. And that's really when the
Yeah.
industry took off. So that's when the funeral industry, which is not the same as the cemetery industry, but it's where the two started to connect because funeral directors are the ones who usually make those arrangements to get the vault. So they're hand in hand this way.
Right.
But the thing is that this is an idea that we've outgrown, and we also understand some things too. Bodies are not automatically infectious or contagious or dangerous in any way. As a matter of
Right.
fact, what we've
Oh, really?
learned through
Yeah.
through studies throughout the world is that it's what we're putting into the grave with the body that's actually causing any kind of what we call cemetery plume, which is the actual effect of the any kind of pollution that we're talking about, which really has to do with the breaking down of all those materials, those synthetics and those varnishes and all of those things that are in the casket that leach out into
So in
into
the
the ground.
casket, and also, are most bodies embalmed? I mean, is embalming, is that the proper term? Is what we do when
Yeah,
we, yeah,
yeah.
and that itself involves all kinds of toxic chemicals that might leach out into the ground?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I do want to qualify that though, because
Okay.
the major ingredient that we think about in standard arterial embalming is formaldehyde, and formaldehyde has a shelf life in most embalming situations, right? Just standard stuff of about 2 weeks. So it has a
Oh,
very short shelf life in terms of retarding the decomposition. So we talk about winter burials here in New England. What's keeping people preserved for the winter? It's not
yeah.
the embalming; it's the cold because
It's
they
the
put them
cold.
out in the cold. but yeah,
Is that what
people
we're
are.
trying? Is that what we're
Yeah,
trying to do? Are we trying to preserve the body? I mean, this is
that's
like
the
what I was
point.
talking about in my monologue. Like, how did this even come into being? So, this
Right.
all comes from this guy who took a journey to Egypt, and like
Well,
this whole
that's about
notion
the
of
vault. Yeah,
that's about the vault.
that's about the vault.
So
But
the
what happened?
embalming process had a
Yeah.
different history.
That was
Okay,
a different thing that
right,
happened at the same time, right? So there were a bunch of different things that happened at the same time. We got rid of
right,
miasma theory and went to germ theory. We stopped dying on the farm and we ended up dying in hospitals.
yeah,
And we ended up with this vault idea. So the cemetery, changed and became a lawn place where you mow lawns and throw pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers and stuff.
right,
But as far as the embalming, the care of the body, that was always taken care of by the family and by the women in the community or church members or birth midwives who would come in and help. So the body, the care of the body itself, changed during the Civil War because of the need for embalming or the desire for embalming in order to get Northern soldiers back home. Abraham Lincoln is
I
the person
see.
we have to thank for that.
Yeah,
But that's so that became the pillar of the funeral industry itself, the funeral director industry, and that just sort of hit its apex in the 1950s, where things became more and more elaborate. The caskets became elaborate. The embalming became something that people expected now, not that they aspired
right,
to it because that's what the affluent people did.
right.
And so from that point, things have slowly been sort of turning around to the point now where more and more people are interested in this. I've watched it grow for 15 years. From we had one natural burial cemetery in the U.S. in 1998, and now we have over 350 that I know about, and I don't know about all of them. Not everybody tells me, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but people want it. They want it in their neighborhood,
Becoming
and they
absolutely,
want
yeah,
it in all different flavors, as you were talking about. Here in New
yeah.
Hampshire, we're required to have funeral. We're required to have a cemetery in every municipality. So every town has to provide burial space for its own citizens. Now, this isn't the case all over the country, but municipal cemeteries are pretty big. We can
Yeah.
create spaces in those, and we do have some that have already done this. I work with an awful lot of cemetery trustees all over the country, but particularly here in New Hampshire, who are contemplating creating some green space, carving out some space so that they can do this.
Right.
But we also have natural cemeteries. People are just starting cemeteries that bury naturally. That's all there is. And then, as you mentioned, conservation level, which is a natural burial cemetery for the purpose of burying this way, but also doing this on conservation land. So we're conserving land first and burying there. So it's all happening, it's all shifting, but you can see
Right.
that over the last 140 years or so, there's been a huge switch from, one thing that we're looking to go back to in a modern iteration.
Right.
Yeah.
So what so when so you talk about alternatives to caskets. What sorts of alternatives are there specifically? I've heard about, which this is my personal fascination. I've heard about like mushroom suits and things like that. I mean, what are we talking about in terms of containers that are alternative to the
Sure.
conventional casket?
Sure. Well, let's dispense with that first.
Okay, good. Let's
Okay.
dispense. Yeah, let's dispense with that.
The Infinity Suit was an art project, and it just sort of
Oh,
it gathered wings when J. Ram Lee, who came up with it, did a
yeah,
TED talk about it, and it did. It grabbed everybody's imagination, got people
right.
talking, which is the best thing about things like this. In the scientific community, there's no respect for this because,
Is that
first of
right?
all, well, when we bury bodies at the right depth, which is about 3.5 feet,
Yeah.
and we
Three and a
do
half
it
feet?
3.5 feet. Yeah.
That's really
Well, there are only 2 states in the country that require a
the
burial
6
depth more than 3.5 feet, and that's five
wow.
feet. So it's,
Because we always think 6 feet, 6 feet is the standard,
it,
but 3.5 feet is the standard.
yeah, it never has been. 3.5 feet is actually the
Interesting.
standard,
That's an
and
interesting fact.
and uh,
Okay.
and it works beautifully because that's where all the
Yeah.
microbes live, right? That's where we want all the coffin beetles. That's why we call them that. We
Yep.
want the body to decompose at a natural rate. So and these are not mushrooms, by the way. She started out with shiitake mushroom, uh, inoculating this suit,
Yeah. I think
but
that's what I
it's
remember
now
something.
she's moved
Yeah.
it to mycelium. So mycelium is that kind of white cotton candy like stuff that's on the bottom of leaf litter. It doesn't
Hmm.
grow at 3.5 to 4 feet. It grows at the surface.
I see.
So you're wasting your money.
I see. And
You've
yeah.
probably heard of other things too, like
Yep.
Italian capsula mundi burial pods, and they don't exist. They're a theory. And you've probably heard of permession, which is the idea of freeze drying bodies and then shaking them up so that they're in little tiny pieces and then burying them. Again, no scientific basis for that
Right.
at all. So
Interesting.
you're gonna hear about all of these
Yeah.
things, and the idea, but honestly, the best part about them is that it does get people talking. But the
Right.
worst part is that it makes green burial pretty not sexy. And the problem is, it's very sexy because when
Oh,
you're buried
well,
properly, and
yeah.
you're buried in a super gorgeous linen or cotton or hemp shroud, or a beautiful casket that was made by someone who loves you,
Right.
made out of pine, which is native to us right here, or even found objects, found materials that are organic materials like twig coffins, and bark coffins, and we have a wonderful. We're really lucky right next door in Dummerston, Vermont. We have Mary Lauren Fraser, who is one of 2 people in the U.S. That I know about who weaves caskets out of willow.
Oh, that's
All
beautiful.
Yeah, and
That's
it's
lovely.
happening
Yeah.
locally. The idea
Right.
is to get resource things that are local and support your local craftspeople and artists. This is how we're going to make a difference. Get rid of all that other stuff, put the bodies in the ground at the right level, do the right things, and nature will take its course as it always has.
Right.
No pollution, no problems, less cost, as you mentioned.
Yep.
Yes, it does cost less. It's
Yeah.
about
What would you say is the
yeah. Actually, I
comparison?
do. I have the figures on that. An average lawn cemetery burial is going to be somewhere between $4,000 and $11,000, and that's just for the grave and the opening and closing. That's it. That's what that is. The average, in a study that I've done with all of the cemeteries that I work with, average for a green burial is around 2,600. 26,
Yeah,
2700.
significant savings
Significant
for
savings.
sure.
And if the family doesn't hire a funeral director
Yeah.
and simply keeps or brings their loved one home for a home funeral,
Yep.
the cost is nothing. It's virtually nothing. It doesn't cost you anything
Right.
to file your own paperwork or
So
transport someone in your car, any of that kind of stuff.
right. So
Yeah.
I am curious. Before I am going to open the phones in just a minute. I do want to ask you though. So I was curious about this myself. So I'm wondering about the laws. So if
Sure.
you could talk a little bit about that, but like if I just wanted to, for example, get buried in my backyard, have my boyfriend dig a 3.5 foot hole and
Yep.
stick me in there with a nice twig shroud and put a little rock on top that had my name carved in it, maybe. Is that something I
That's it.
can't do? But is
It is
that something
something you absolutely can do.
okay, so there aren't any laws restricting the
There
burial of
are
human
correct.
bodies.
Correct. Well, not
Okay,
in every state.
right.
On the
It
New Hampshire
differs.
Funeral Resources page, there is there's a whole chart that we use all over the country, and it's the rules around this for every state. So you want to go and take a look at that. But here
I
in New
see.
Hampshire, all we have are the directions from the state that have to do with distances. So it's setback information. It's 50 feet from a known water source, meaning your well, or a stream that's running through your property. It's 100 feet from a building, a state highway, that type of thing. It's very, very simple rules. And this applies to all cemeteries. If you bury on your own property, you are creating a private family cemetery. It has to be someone on your property who is related to you. You can't just bury anyone on your property. But there's some other rules that go along with it too. You need to create an easement. You need to it needs to be filed with your deed upon transfer. So there are some things that you have to do. You want to check with local zoning. Although in New Hampshire, I only know of one place that has zoning. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I don't
Right.
know about it yet.
Right.
But it's really very simple. I've assisted many families. Just a month ago, did one. People who just chose to, their loved one dies in hospice at home. The family comes, they care for the body, they shroud the body. Someone makes a casket.
That's beautiful. That's
They
great.
go into the backyard, do the burial, and it's deeply meaningful to people.
Yeah.
And they,
Yeah,
they're
it
not
takes
doing
away
it
all
to be
all the
cheap.
commercial baloney that you have to go through. I mean, I know I went through this with my dad, like I just felt like it was just, I didn't know what to expect at all, and when my father died, and it just felt like it was like I felt like it was like buying a used car or something. I don't know. I just felt like there was a lot of, and it was very impersonal, and this sounds like just so much more connected and natural and yeah, and just something that a lot more people for sure are gonna want, because I don't think people
It is.
realize that they have other options a lot of times. They just go with whatever is the standard thing, and they don't realize that there are options.
Well, and that's absolutely true, and that's a
Yeah.
big part of the part of the movement here is to get people more in touch with the fact that they do need to make these decisions, and
Yeah.
that not making these decisions doesn't mean that this problem goes away.
Right.
We still need to someone will need to deal with that, and I think more people are picking that up, and they're also recognizing that the more they think about it, the more the work they do with their own families, the greater conversations they start to have with their families. Because at the end of the day, when someone dies, if you haven't told your kids what you want, and if you haven't written it down, if you haven't made all of these plans clear to them, or you've talked to one but you haven't talked to another, think about the legacy that leaves to your family. Gee, they didn't care enough to tell me what they wanted. I didn't think to ask. They told my sister, but they didn't tell me. What am
Yeah.
I? Kind of.
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
are important conversations we're trying to have. We've been trying to have for a long time. Hospice really was the start of this conversation. We're moving it now into home funeral. What happens after hospice? Hospice goes away as soon as the person dies. Then
Right.
what does the family do? The question is usually from the hospice nurse, what funeral home should we call? Well, the question we're asking them to ask now is, would you like to know about your funeral options? And when we can do that, and we as hospice personnel can explain to people, you have this whole array of options that you didn't know you had. It's amazing what people choose.
Yeah.
And they feel it. It's really important to them to be
Yeah.
more involved, more responsible.
Right, right. So fantastic. All right. So I am going to open the phones in the chat. So if anybody has any questions that they want to call in or chat in about green burials, we've been talking with Lee Webster, who is a funeral reform advocate. We've been talking about, what is a green funeral or a green burial, I should say, and some of the, ways that that is becoming, it sounds like it's really a movement and people are demanding it more. And so we're talking a little bit about what is a green funeral, how can you get a green funeral or a burial, the cost of this, some of the containers that are available for people. So if you want to call in or chat in, feel free to do that. I'm just going to continue my conversation with Lee in the meantime. So I was wondering about, so I think you mentioned this a little bit, but I just want to make sure I understand. So I can have a green burial in a conventional cemetery if right, I can do that right now if I want to, but there are also these sort of conservation cemeteries that are devoted to this notion. Right. So I'm just wondering, what is the availability of that at this point? How are there? I know the one behind me is actually a picture I ripped off the internet, but it's from in Gainesville, Florida. I've never been there. Yeah, it's in Gainesville, Florida.
Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery.
You know exactly where. Okay, so this is.
Well, yes, of course.
So you've been there.
These are my people.
These are your people.
These are my people.
So how many of these are there in the country or even in the world?
We have about 15 here in the U.S. In fact, the first one in Ramsey Creek in Westminster, South Carolina, is a conservation cemetery. So that was the first concept that came here. But I do want to correct one thing. First, green funerals is absolutely a great term because it means that we are paying attention to doing things in a really wholesome way right from the beginning, from the
right, the entire thing, not just the burial, but everything, right?
And and the other piece is that those cemeteries that happen in the green burial that happens in cemeteries only happens when the trustees that we vote in every March into that position change the bylaws or create bylaws or recognize bylaws that don't require a vault. So that's the only legal issue, and it's not a law, it's a policy. So be sure we know the difference about that. Green burial is legal everywhere. There is nothing in any state statute that says anything about not burying without a vault. The state doesn't care what's in there other than the body. So that's why we can get away with all these other outrageous things. But if someone is looking to be buried in their own hometown, in their home cemetery, they have to go to the trustees and find out if it's allowed there. And if it's not, they have to campaign for it. They have to advocate for it. Because Joe Seehey, who started the Green Burial Council all those years ago, said to me once, nobody goes to a restaurant and orders something that's not on the menu. So if you decide that, someone dies and you go to your cemetery and say, I want a green burial, and they say, well, nobody's asked for it, so no, that's not possible. We have these bylaws. Well, you better work on it now. Let's get that changed. So we call those hybrid burials, and municipal burials, whatever you want to call. It's green, it's natural. That's the other thing. Green and natural. Green burial really refers to all of it. Yeah. And but all of it is natural too. But to answer your question about the conservation burial, we've got about 15 in the U.S. and we've got many more that are on track. The reason that we have so few compared, out of 350, only 15 are self-identify this way, is that it requires that you have a conservation entity, a land trust, or even a town conservation commission here in New Hampshire. We do that too. But it has to have some other really bona fide land trust entity that is partnering and backing. Because what goes on this land is not just a bunch of burials all over the place. The burial happens on a specific piece of the property, and it is, and all of it is monitored for best practices. So So no, we don't have one close by yet.
Right. What is the closest one that would
Well,
be?
the closest one that we're waiting momentarily, and we've been waiting for a little while, is in Newfane, Vermont, and that is at Manitou. It's the Manitou Conservation Grounds, and the cemetery is called Higher Ground. It's not open to the public yet. They're still working on completing things, but that's going pretty well. We have Kestrel in Maine, in Kennebunk. So we've got that is open.
Oh, okay.
Baldwin Hill is what it's called, Baldwin Hill. And I'm sorry, it's Baldwin Hill, not Kestrel. There's a group in Massachusetts really trying hard to get this going. A group
Okay.
in everywhere. Everybody's working on it, and there is availability in every state. It's just it might not be right next to you.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's good. So if I wanted to make this happen right now, so I'm, hopefully going to live another 30 years. I'm hoping that's what I'm hoping for. 30 years, I'll be happy. But I think it's important that people make end of life decisions anytime because you never know. So if I wanted to make this part of my sort of end of life, choices, is there anything, what would be the steps that I would take? Is there anything I can do right now to ensure that would take place?
Well, you can't insure it completely because
Right.
once you're gone, you don't have any control.
You don't
That's
have
one
any
of the first
control.
things we have to learn when we
That's
start
right.
doing after
That's
death
right.
work. But you
Yep.
can certainly make this happen, make the people in your life know what you want to have happen. And here in New Hampshire, we use you complete your advance directives. They're very easy. You can get a hold of them just about anywhere, doctor's offices, anywhere. You can draw them down offline. You'll find links to that also on the New Hampshire website. And in that, you can add anything you want about your funeral choices. And we also have a booklet that you can use. There are different booklets all over. You'll find those there too that you can complete so that your family knows. But the key here is not just writing it down, but it's that conversation.
Yeah.
So if
Having that
nobody knows
conversation
what
with
you were
people.
thinking, it doesn't do you any good.
That's right. That's the most
Yeah.
important piece for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of
Yeah.
the things we also make sure we want people to understand is that if you find a cemetery and you purchase a plot, that's fine. That's a good thing to do, especially since green burial space is going to be limited to begin with because cemeterians are a little skeptical of this at the moment.
I'm sure they are because this is a complete change from
Yeah.
everything. It's so interesting to me how these things just, like you said, it's just this one, how these things evolve over time and then they become the norm and then people don't even question it. They don't even think to themselves, well, how did this even come to be the normal thing? It doesn't make any sense, really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like some of these, because a lot of these things, like you said, are based on superstition or not really understanding even the decomposition process and
Yeah.
and so I think it's so fascinating how these things come to be and and how difficult it is for people to make changes or adjust. But I think once it hits them, once they realize, oh my gosh, this doesn't make any sense to do all these things, I think that more and more people will. I think you reach a critical mass, and more people will be demanding this. And I think that, that's a terrific thing. That's a terrific.
That's
movement.
true.
Yeah.
And I think once they see it, once someone has attended a green burial or they've
Yeah.
been been in the home when there's a home funeral happening, they just go, oh my gosh,
Why
it's this
haven't we been doing
huge
this way all
light.
along? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing because we've gotten to the point. I think part of what happened, especially during those 50s and 60s, with funerals and with the burial piece, just as cremation was starting to take off. So that's sort of the next piece here of the industrialization of death in the United States. Is that it became so much more efficient, right? We could just hire a funeral director. The body would be gone. Goodness, yeah, we didn't want to deal with that anymore.
Right.
Well, that's still the same person you loved before they stopped breathing. There's nothing to be afraid of, and why wouldn't you want them to stay? I mean, the number of people I've spoken to, particularly husbands and wives who've been married for 40 years, who a spouse dies and they're the one at 3 a.m. that comes down and sits beside the bed or lies next to the bed and is deeply grateful for those quiet moments that they couldn't ever have if the body had been whisked away.
Yeah.
And it's the same, if you move to the green burial piece, part of what's happening is that we're bringing back ritual and ceremony. We're bringing back the procession, where nobody's trucked there in a church cart. They're not, you don't drive there, and there's no indoor-outdoor carpet. There's no hydraulics. People pick up the body in the parking lot, and they carry their loved one in. They literally carry the burden of their grief. And when they're in and they personally lower the body into the ground. And then everyone grabs a shovel and again puts their back into it. And there is nothing like that feeling of doing this yourself. Not, get rid of the mystery, cut the mystery out. There's no mystery around death other than the ones that we have with ourselves. There's no reason for us not to be doing all of these things. There is only one thing that funeral directors can do that we can't, by the way, and that is embalm bodies. And we're not interested.
And we're not interested in embalming. What the heck's the point of that anyway? Right.
Yeah.
So is this, you mentioned cremation. I was curious. So cremation's not green either, really.
At all.
I mean, because you're using a ton of energy, right? I mean, I guess that's the main reason it's not green.
Well, there's an awful lot about cremation that's a problem, and I won't go into all of it, but yes, an enormous amount of fossil fuels are being used. The mercury in our teeth and the heavy metals that we've been accumulating all our lives go up the stacks and down into our waterways. There's a whole list of that you can find on the website too, and at the Conservation Burial Alliance. Because I think the thing that gets me the most, though, this is the big key takeaway about cremation, is that it, first of all, it produces about 250 pounds per person of CO2 emitted. So that's pretty significant. You add up the numbers and you'll see. But the main thing is that the final result, this is an unfinished process. Green burial, put the body in the ground, you're done. You're not digging it up, you go away. Nature takes its course. Cremation, you have 7 to 10 pounds of calcium phosphate and sodium. All right, this is not available nutrients. These are this is it's very dense, heavy. It's pulverized bone. Okay, you put it on fragile plants, like scattering it up on your favorite mountainside, killing all those the fragile alpine flora. You put it on your grandmother's rose bush and you're going to kill the rose bush. Anybody who tells you that there is such a thing as cremation conservation is absolutely wrong. And this is our concern, because we've got enormous amounts of cremated remains that still need to go somewhere, and they are not environmentally friendly. They're difficult to dispose of. They kill everything that they touch. Right. So
if you want to be an environmentally friendly, green burials are practically your only way to go. Really, I mean, cremation's not green.
Sense.
They make the most sense.
They make the most sense. I mean, there are some other options that are showing up. You may have heard of recomposition, which is Katrina Spade, who, by the way, was brought up in Hanover, right here. And that's legal now in 3 states. And
what is that? I haven't
heard
of that. Yeah,
recomposition is human composting. It's actually called natural organic reduction. In legal terms, cremation, it is a form of cremation because cremation is a reduction. Okay, so is alkaline hydrolysis, which is not legal here in New Hampshire. It was, and then it wasn't. Still. Right. The industry doesn't want you to have any other alternatives because they've sunk an awful lot of money into those crematories.
It's all about the bucks, as usual. Yeah.
Yeah.
So human composting is different than a green burial. So explain the difference.
So what it is it's basically green burial. It's decomposition, it's a natural decomposition process, but it happens above ground in a facility. Okay, in the facility, there are these sort of honeycomb looking places where you can put the body and many bodies on a whole wall, and you put them into their own little cylinder with natural materials, alfalfa and wood chips and that type of thing. It's climate controlled and so on, and it's basically composting, human composting. The problem is that again, unfinished, it has an entire, at least 1 cubic yard of compost, beautiful stuff. It takes care of all of those heavy metals and everything else, but it then has to be trucked out of, they're mostly in cities, going to be mostly in cities. They have to be trucked out of the city to the country and dumped somewhere. So why aren't we just putting bodies in the ground?
Yeah, right, right. Right. It makes the most sense to me that we just put them in the ground. When you have, so when you're burying people just 3.5 feet, is there a problem with, this is just a practical, is there a problem with like odor, a problem with animals or anything like
I've been
that?
waiting for you to ask.
Any of that stuff, that people might, just
Yeah.
because people might be, what, do I want one of these next to me? Do I want to live next to one of these?
Yeah, it's always my favorite question. It's usually the top of my list. Animal disturbances is what we call it. And we're down 3.5 feet. So if you do the math on this, you realize if the bottom of the body is there, and even if you're a supersized person, you're not going to go too far. You're still going to have an 18 to 24 or even more inches of what we call the smell barrier. No animals can smell deeper than 12 inches. So, we don't have, now feral pigs can go a little bit deeper and so on, but they're not interested in us. They're just not interested. Who wants this when they can have live prey above ground? The biggest issue that we have with graves is that the skunks like to come and get the grubs that have been turned up with the fresh soil. The other piece we do with green burial graves too, though, is that the first thing we do is when we dug them, we put down what we call an oxygen trap. So we'll put flowers or pine needles, pine boughs or something. Then we put the shroud in or the casket in, and then we blanket that with more shrouds. So we're creating oxygen. It's creating a really good place for, we want humidity, we want oxygen, we want everything in there to do the right job. Then we bring all the soil in. We bring in everything that we've displaced. So if we're displacing with a casket, for instance, that means we're going to have a mound up on top. Right. So not only are we going to have the 18 to 24 inches, we're going to have another foot or more on top of that. No animals come anywhere near it. No, dead bodies don't stink.
Yeah.
Not you're not going to smell it, anything, if you buried it that deep.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great. I'm glad to know that, because I think a lot of people, like you said, I'm sure that's a question you get a lot, because that would be, but sounds like not an issue at all. So
no, and in fact, I mean, not to scare anybody, but what's going on in a casket, in a closed, sealed casket inside a concrete box that is going to crack and let fluids in? It's going to crack.
Yeah.
Concrete cracks in the ground. What's going on in there? You don't want to know about.
Yeah, you certainly don't.
Yeah.
No.
People often ask too, how long does it take?
Yeah, how long does it take? That's a good question.
Couple of months for the soft tissue. Okay. And then it's bone. So by that point there's nothing going on.
All right. Well, I think that this has been a fabulous conversation. We're winding it down just a little bit, but I was wondering if there's anything that I didn't ask you that is just on your mind, that's something that you get a lot, or something that you think that people want to know about green burials.
I was fascinated that you were zeroing in on the spiritual aspect of this, the religious aspect of this, because I do get a lot of questions about that.
That's good.
And people are really surprised to learn that who's doing this. So we have to look back in history a little bit and think about this. Muslims bury naturally, right? No problem. Jews bury naturally, no problem. Quakers, in fact, never took this on. You're talking about Buddhists and Hindus tend to be cremation based. It's a purification ritual for them. So it doesn't fit. So, you think for yourself, well, then if we're talking religion, religious groups, who does that leave? Well, it leaves Christians.
Yeah.
That's who's doing this.
Right. That's it. All right.
So let's think about that for a minute. Yeah. Who's at the top of the chain when it comes to Christians? In the Catholic Church, it has completely embraced green burial, did from the very beginning. They're delighted by it. I wrote a piece that you can find on the website about this and why it's so important. Why, and I'm not Catholic, but I was fascinated to read the Pope's encyclical on nature when he first came in. And that actually applies directly to green burial principles. So the Catholic Church, we have more Catholic cemeteries, hybrid cemeteries around the country. It's about half Catholic, and then the rest municipalities and so on. So religious groups are getting behind it when they begin to think about it more thoughtfully.
Right. It's not inconsistent with really any.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. And politically, politically, that's another piece, the political piece. Well, if you look at this, we may have a lot of divides in this country, but everybody is dying. And,
That's for sure.
The blue folks they want this because it's good for the environment and we're making it accessible to people regardless of race and income and gender identification or anything else.
Yep.
And then we've got the red state folks who don't want the government telling them what to do, and they're more than happy to exercise.
That's right.
This
sounds very libertarian.
This is for
to me.
everybody.
Yeah.
This is for
everybody. This is great. This is right. This cuts across all walks of life, all political groups, religious groups is fabulous. All right. So if somebody wanted to contact you, is there any, so where should they go? To the website? You have a website, or where should they go to find out more information?
Almost everywhere there. But the easiest place to find me is at New Hampshire Funeral Resources. And that's just nhfuneral.org.
nhfuneral.org. That's the best place to go. If people want to find out more about this, and I'm sure that there will be people out there that do, because I just think that this is, the time has come for this for sure. I think that definitely this is going to become, it's going to be more normalized. It's going to become, like you said, this is going to be the conventional way to do burials in the future, in the near future, I would hope. So I'm very excited.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
I got some gray hair going on here. I want it ready.
Yeah.
And I am.
Yeah, I think it'll happen for sure. All right. Well, thank you, Lee. It's been fabulous talking to you, and I'm so happy that you came on our show. We're a brand new show, and I'm just delighted that you came on to talk to me, because I am personally find this just an incredible topic, and I now feel like I'm armed and ready to spread the word. So that's
there you
great.
Go. That's what advocacy is all about.
That's what
right?
advocacy. Right. You've done your job. Education, advocacy. Yep.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. Have a wonderful week and a wonderful holiday and all that good stuff.
You too.
All right.
Thanks so much.
See you, Lee. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. And for those of you that are out there in Let's Have Wordland, thank you very much for tuning in tonight. We had a great conversation with Lee Webster. It's so funny when you do an interview, you have all these questions prepared, and then it just goes in directions you never even imagined. So, but I think that very informative, right? So something that hopefully people are interested in. I'm interested in it, and I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And Let's Have Words is a show that's coming to you every Sunday from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm your host, Lara Samuels. And the Let's Have Words is a talk show. So we talk to people doing interesting things in the area. If you are a person in the area who feels like you're doing an interesting thing, please contact us and let us know. I think coming across the screen somewhere, there it is. Would you like to be on the show? There it is. I'm trying to coordinate my finger pointing with there we go. Send an email to wwhrmedia@gmail.com with your topic and role. We would love to talk to you. We consider all topics. We talk about everything. Last week we talked about bluegrass music. This week we're talking about green burials, green funerals. So you never know what you're going to get. We're not afraid of controversial topics. So whatever you guys have for us, we're happy to entertain the possibility of having you on. Let's Have Words is a call-in talk show happening once again every week from 8 to 9 p.m. Sunday, and broadcasting on WWHR HR media, internet media. So that's what's happening. The philosophy of Let's Have Words, by the way, is we don't always have controversial issues, but we just think here at the show that conversation is so important to just keeping those lines of communication open. Like, even if you don't agree with somebody, even if you have completely different opinions. I mean, I really feel like one of the biggest problems we're facing right now is people are just going off into their own little bubbles and they're not communicating with each other. And that's when you set up a recipe for disaster. So I just think that the philosophy here at Let's Have Words is keeping those lines of communication open. We're not, you're not trying to necessarily persuade anybody of anything. You just want to make sure that you're constantly talking, because that's how we get along, and that's how we have a civil society. Once again, not always broaching controversial topics. We didn't, green, like as Lee Webster mentioned tonight, the whole notion of a green burial is something that everybody can celebrate, everybody can get into. So regardless of your political philosophy. And so anyway, great to have you guys on. And remember, keep those lines of communication open. See you next week.